See, all the entrepreneurs, the early bird catches the worm. So glad to see that. We have it's very interesting the group that we have, because championing the world involves leaving Spain and becoming international, which is something that we look for as investors very hard to give our LPs returns if we don't create a big company. So we need to go to more countries. Spain isn't an overly large country. And we have very different stages here, because Avinash, you guys founded your company in 2020, 2 short years ago, and you started actually internalization just 4 months ago, right? Whereas Javier, as one of the pioneering funds in Spain, together with Big Sur in different stages, you have a number of different companies in your portfolio. For example, Job and Talent, that was founded in 2009. I think it was Devo or Clarity. No, Devo was founded in 2011 and Clarity in 2017. Very different stories, more mature companies, some of them that have focused on markets like the US. So there are different expansion strategies. So I'd like to talk first about the first decision you need to make as an entrepreneur with the investors is when you go international, when you start to look at countries beyond Spain. And maybe Javier, we'll start with you. Maybe you can tell us some stories there.
I think that has changed dramatically over time. When we started investing 2012, companies were really more looking at their own domestic markets, and there were certainly a lot of mistakes in our portfolio where companies were trying to access the US market with very little funding and going there to raise financing. And that was, we realized, or the companies realized, it was they didn't have any of the checks, no? Meaning, hey, not from Stanford, not from Google, not from Apple, and that just didn't work. Especially at the time, all the money was concentrated in Silicon Valley. It was not, New York was not as active as it is today, or Boston. But that has changed dramatically in recent years, and really companies start with a global mindset from pretty much the very beginning. In some cases, with a dual headquartership, New York and Madrid, or elsewhere. And when we come into the companies, normally we get in to help with the international expansion, but then international expansion in most cases is already in place.
When you invest, they've started their expansion already internationally.
Yep. So that has changed. So a few years ago, it was based in primarily the main market was Spain eventually, and we're coming in to say, okay, where do we expand? And we can get into that later. But now, when we come in, they're already in 3, 4, 5 different markets. No?
Right. I think that's changing a little bit too, but maybe we can get back to that, because as you say, 10 years ago it was a very different market, and companies didn't go outside as quickly. Entrepreneurs weren't quite as aggressive or in their approach, and the financing wasn't there to accompany them. And that's changed a lot, because companies are going international much quicker. Avinash, you're an example of that. Maybe you can tell us about your story. Maybe 2 years since first funding, and in your first market 4 months ago.
Yeah, I think when it comes to internationalization, it really depends on the model. So there are some models that are very frictionless to expand, and you can be already from launch in 20 markets, right? There are other models, especially things like our model, more fintech, usually very subject to regulation, and in our case, huge barriers to entry for entering a new country. So in our case, we see internationalization as something that you should only do when you have to. We in fact feel it the other way around. We feel that there is sometimes pressure from VCs or other investors to ask when you're going to internationalize, what's the next country, right? And if you're not opening another country, it feels like you're not growing fast enough because of what you said, right? Other companies in early stage are now in 20 markets. So from our point of view, it really depends on the depth of the market you're in. In terms of actually building a sustainable business with good unit economics, it often doesn't make sense to internationalize very early. And it's better to make good product market fit in your home country and later think about expanding to others, right?
Okay, so maybe, in your model, where you have an app that advances earnings to employees, so they don't have to wait for their payday to get the money, that has special connotations. As you said, different models expand in different ways. Some that are software only can scale with almost no presence in local markets. Other models need a lot of boots on the ground. But typically, in terms of expansion, when we're looking at internationalization, we like to see that you have a strong position already in your local market, and that you have some product market fit, that you are growing, you have validation, your unit economics are working, and then you can think about going outside. You can't think about going outside before you've got a couple of things in order. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, totally agree, because in fact, in the previous venture that I did, we made that mistake. We went to 9 markets before we were ready, and in the end, it just created a huge tax on the team, a huge distraction, when we could have been focusing on making the core product better in our home country. And if we had mastered that, we would have been much better when we later decided to expand.
Expanding too early can actually lead to failure, right? If you don't have the right team, and the right base to jump from, there's no way you can, overextend yourself. Javier, any insights? A lot of these companies that we talked about, like Job and Talent, you guys came in later when they were more mature, right? We have some things together, like PAC, that we've seen internationalize together. But any observations in terms of how you've seen expansion or discussions in your portfolio companies about what markets to go to?
Yeah, it's very interesting, because and I think it's one of the advantages of Spanish companies. They have many choices, no? So we see companies, that are, as the title of this panel is, they're born right in Madrid. We would prefer to say in Spain. But they expand in many different ways. Now, some are expanding into Latin directly, and we have recent investments like Velvo or others that are really focusing on the Latin market, despite having offices in Spain. Others that choose the US, and they set up an office from day one in the US, while having all the engineering team in Spain. Others expand mostly into Europe. So I think it depends a bit on the particularities of each sector, segment, where it's easier, no? And you would normally try to choose those markets where we can have some initial traction easier than just taking a lot of time that it requires. As you were saying, a lot of product market fit, just because the markets are a bit more sophisticated. And at the end of the day, you have to bear in mind that companies have two scarce resources now, which is funding and therefore time. So in a given time frame, you need to do a lot of things. And you need to prioritize in order to be able to raise the next funding round, assuming the company cannot bootstrap itself.
One of the markets that you mentioned, which is the U.S., internationalizing into the U.S. depends what kind of model you have. If you have a SaaS B2C, it really doesn't matter, because you don't need people in the U.S. really to expand the model. But if you're an enterprise software, solutions like Carto or Clarity, the U.S. is a very important market in terms of defining your success. And if you go to that market, you really have to have a greater level of maturity as an organization and funding than you need to go to than expanding to France or expanding to Mexico.
No, absolutely. And it also happens that Americans or maybe Anglo-Saxons, they sell themselves amazingly, no? And then they all have.
Be careful, huh?
Be careful. They all have these amazing CVs and experience and everything. But then and therefore it's not that they're expensive, that the compensation is very high, no? And you're expecting a lot from them, and you know the rotation in salespeople, sales managers is just outrageous, no? And it's difficult. So you really need to, you know, the way a lot of our companies are doing it is that, you know, they're just training their people in the main hub, and it's relatively easy to attract talent from many different nationalities. I think the average number of nationalities in our portfolio companies is 20. So not just on an engineering development roles, but, you know, marketing, sales, operations, you name it. And then, you know, once they know the dynamics, those are the ones that go to open different markets.
You touched on a good point there, which leads me to the how. You know, we talked a little bit about when to expand or when to go out, you know, start your internalization process, but the how is very important. And not just from the, you know, from the economic side, but from the cultural side. Because as soon as you go outside, you have an extra challenge in making sure the distant organization understands what you do and how you do it in the right way. I mean, you can lose control very easily if you don't take care of that, because the organization is running in different directions. You've actually faced that, you know, in your expansion to Colombia is the first market. Maybe you can talk about that and how you're dealing with the culture, the time differences, because you need a local presence to attend to those employees that are looking to anticipate their earnings, right?
Yeah, I think first to just clarify a bit about what our expansion meant for us, because for most companies when they're doing an expansion, it's because they kind of saturated their home market, or they just need more room to grow, right? There's also the case of some companies that expand in order to find better product market fit. For us, our hypothesis was that we will eventually be a Latin-based company when we expanded to Colombia. And that hypothesis so far is being confirmed, right? So that meant that the expansion was even more important for us than for most ventures expanding, and we were willing to sacrifice traction in Spain in order to do that. And so what we did is we handpicked our 5 best team members from the team in Spain, and we convinced them to move to Bogota. And that has been a really good move, because nobody knows better our culture, our way of working, how to sell the product, how to activate this product than the people that have already worked with us for 2 years. So
your case is, it may also be different, because when you start an expansion, you always want to have not just use people that know your company very well to go into those countries, and it helps to create that culture locally, but also bringing people back to get the corporate image and feel part of the organization.
One thing that has happened recently is that not just having different geographies or markets, but with remote work, that is, there are probably dozens of markets now, and one role that a few years ago was not even considered is head of talent or head of people, that are increasingly more important roles within the organizations, and that companies are bringing in much earlier than they used to do. No, it's not that, hey, now we're a 300, 400 people team and we need to bring someone with that expertise. That we're noticing, and we're advising companies that they should bring in that kind of talent as part of the C-level team pretty early on. No?
Now, in terms of culture, in your case, there's something special there, because if you see your product market fit is, as you say, is probably in LATAM. And I think you mentioned to me that, again, you started in 2020, but now in 4 months, you're already at the same numbers revenue numbers in LATAM that you were in Spain, right? And that's been 4 months, more or less?
No, not quite that fast, but we've got to the same revenue numbers 5 times faster.
5 times faster.
So
That's still pretty fast.
yeah, and with a similar size team as when we had those revenue figures in Spain. So
Maybe the challenge there is a little bit, because you say you don't want the people to go native. I mean, you do, because you want them to understand the market. But in this case, it's the Spanish team that needs to really understand the Latin American markets and not the other way around, right?
yeah, and that's tricky because sitting in Madrid or Barcelona with 7 hours time difference and you've never been to Colombia, it's very hard for people to understand how the product works differently there, how people feel differently about things there. And I think that there's 2 things that we'll do in that sense. The first is that we kind of see the organization now as global. We do all of our all hands together. All email updates go to the whole organization. Everyone does cross feedback across countries and stuff like this. Everyone is going to travel, everyone that's in cross country departments. And second of all is that with time, we won't really grow the team in Spain, and we will grow the team in Colombia, in Peru, and other countries that we're present, and that will kind of balance out the...
You're spending a lot of your time in Colombia, I think.
Yes, both me and my co-founder are spending almost half of our time there now, so that's very important also. If you don't go yourself and you don't understand the market yourself, the team is not going to do it on their own.
No, exactly. It's just like being in contact with with customers. The CEO or the C-level team can never lose contact with the customer because you start to miss the understanding. So the when is very important and the where is very important, and it's not a frivolous decision because even expanding in Europe, you have to really do the analysis to understand what markets you may want to go to, right? UK might look like a very interesting market, but it's not because of the competition and the pricing. It's not just, this is big, so I'm going to go to this market next because it's much bigger. It does require a lot of analysis. We really have time to talk about that a lot, but maybe you want to, to add something there.
And part of the how, and that is an increasing trend as well. Many of our companies are actually entering markets through M&A. And obviously M&A of all sizes, but that really speeds up. So you're already entering there with a structure, with clients, with local know-how. I mean, there's then a cultural issue to really embrace the culture of the company. But in some cases we've seen that really accelerates tremendously. Because the other way around is you need to spend a lot of time recruiting, finding the general manager for that country, whether it works or not, and then how a new company landing in, especially when it's enterprise sales, landing into that particular market, and this is proving to be a very interesting strategy as well.
Yeah, I think the acquisition strategy, the inorganic growth versus the organic growth is a very important part of growth companies right now. It's not for every company, every type of company, but it does play an important role, and it's really, again, not discovering anything here. It's the opportunity cost, right? I can go much faster in terms of extending my brand if I can find a good acquisition that will incorporate culturally and add. One of the challenges in that, of course, is acquisitions are not easy. Integrating teams is not easy. Extending the culture is very hard, so you can't get ahead of yourself.
No, and for example, Job and Talent that has a very interesting M&A strategy or inorganic strategy. At the end of the day, they have like a 8-people team looking at acquisitions, and then they have an integration team. Now, for example, they brought in the head of Uber, who did all the integration in Asia. Now, so you need that expertise in-house.
Yep.
That otherwise you just can be very costly otherwise, no? In terms of opportunity cost, but also in terms of actual dollars.
A mistake is very, very costly in acquisitions. But you're talking about companies that are now at a different level of maturity that can afford to have an person team in corporate business development, right? You were talking about mistakes. We have two companies right now that are looking at increasing growth through acquisitions, and that can be very interesting, but you have to be very judicious. In your experience, we don't have a lot of time, and I don't know if we're going to take questions or not, but maybe if there are some, we can handle them. Big mistakes that you've seen in internationalization?
I think that for sure the one that I mentioned at the beginning was entering markets without the right funding structure, no? Because it takes time. Resources tend to be more costly than the ones we have here in Spain, and that just consumes a lot of the available resources, and then you end up with companies running out of cash without having proven KPIs or economics, and then it's very difficult to raise additional funding.
It's tough. It gets tough. We're just about out of time. We've got a couple of seconds on the clock here. Any questions? Any specific questions? Maybe somebody wants to ask one of our panelists? Okay. Thank you very much, I think. Yeah, we're on time. So thank you.